very urgent. Your soulmate just changed their mind about you. Open this now. Something shifted last night. You may not have seen it. You may not have heard anyone say your name. You may not have received the message you were secretly hoping would appear on your screen. And yet, somewhere beyond what you could immediately see, something changed. A decision that once seemed firm suddenly became uncertain. A distance that once felt comfortable suddenly became difficult to maintain. A thought that had been pushed aside returned with unexpected strength. And the strangest part is this: the change did not begin with you chasing, explaining, proving, or demanding anything. It began quietly. It began in a moment when everything around your soulmate became still enough for the truth they had been avoiding to become impossible to ignore. Last night, something reminded them of you. Maybe it was a song. Maybe it was a familiar place. Maybe it was a simple sentence someone said without realizing how deeply it would affect them. Maybe it was a memory they thought they had already buried. Whatever triggered it, the result was the same. They started thinking about you differently, not because you suddenly became more valuable, not because you finally proved your worth, not because you changed yourself to become easier to love, but because something inside them finally began to understand what they had failed to understand before. Sometimes a person does not recognize the importance of a connection while they are standing inside it. Sometimes they need distance to understand closeness. Sometimes silence reveals what constant conversation was hiding. Sometimes losing access to someone's attention makes a person realize how much that attention meant, and sometimes the heart reaches a conclusion long before the mind is ready to admit it. That is why this message feels urgent, not because you should panic, not because you should run after anyone. Not because you should assume every coincidence means someone is secretly returning. The urgency is different. It is the urgency of realizing that your own life is moving. Your own heart is changing. Your own understanding of love is becoming deeper. And somewhere along that journey, someone who once looked away may be beginning to look back. You may have spent a long time wondering why things became complicated. You may have asked yourself why the connection felt powerful one moment and confusing the next. You may have wondered whether you imagined the significance of certain moments. You may have questioned whether your silence mattered. You may have wondered if the other person ever thought about the things that stayed in your mind. And perhaps you eventually reached a point where you told yourself, I need to stop thinking about this. That sentence may have been necessary, because sometimes healing begins when you stop trying to control an outcome. You cannot force another person's heart. You cannot make someone understand what they are not ready to understand. You cannot create genuine feelings through pressure. And you should never have to beg someone to recognize your value. But there is something powerful about stepping back. When you stop chasing an answer, you begin hearing your own inner voice again. When you stop trying to convince someone to stay, you begin understanding what you deserve. When you stop measuring your worth through another person's attention, something inside you becomes stronger. And that strength changes everything. Last night may have been one of those moments for your soulmate. They may have realized that your absence feels different from the absence of everyone else. They may have noticed that time did not erase the memory as completely as they expected. They may have tried to move forward emotionally, only to discover that certain thoughts kept returning, and this is where the story becomes interesting. Because changing one's mind does not always mean immediately taking action. Sometimes the first change happens internally. A person first admits something to themselves, then they wrestle with it, then they question it, then they try to dismiss it. Then they return to it again, and eventually, they realize they cannot keep pretending that nothing has changed. That may be the stage unfolding now. Something inside them has moved, but the outer world may not have caught up yet. You might not see a message, you might not see an apology, you might not see a dramatic declaration. You might simply notice that your own feelings have become strangely calm. And that calm may be more important than you realize, because there is a difference between waiting anxiously and allowing life to unfold. One drains you, the other restores you. You are not being asked to sit beside a phone and wait. You are not being asked to interpret every notification. You are not being asked to turn every coincidence into proof. You are being reminded to remain open without becoming consumed. There is something beautiful about that balance. You can care without chasing. You can hope without depending on an outcome. You can remember someone without forgetting yourself. You can believe that something meaningful may happen while still continuing to live your own life. And perhaps that is the real message hidden inside what happened last night. The change is not only happening in them, it is happening in you too. Think about how different you are from the person you were when this connection first became important. You have learned things. You have experienced disappointment. You have discovered patience. You have encountered moments when you had to choose yourself even though your heart wanted someone else to choose you. You have learned that affection alone cannot create a healthy connection. You have learned that timing matters. You have learned that communication matters. You have learned that consistency matters. And perhaps most importantly, you have learned that love should not require you to abandon your dignity. That lesson was not wasted. Every confusing moment taught you something. Every unanswered question taught you patience. Every disappointment taught you discernment. Every period of silence gave you an opportunity to hear yourself. And now you may be entering a different chapter. The person you have been thinking about may also be entering a different chapter, but this time, the energy is not about proving, it is about understanding, it is about recognizing what was overlooked, it is about seeing the connection with clearer eyes. Perhaps last night they finally asked themselves a question they had avoided for a long time. What if I was wrong? That question can change everything, because once someone seriously considers the possibility that they misunderstood a situation, memories begin appearing differently. A conversation they dismissed suddenly seems important. A small kindness suddenly carries meaning. A moment they thought was ordinary suddenly feels significant. A look they ignored suddenly becomes something they remember. A goodbye that once felt final suddenly feels unfinished. And then another question appears. What if I let something meaningful slip away? That question is uncomfortable. It can make a person restless. It can make them revisit old choices. It can make them examine why they behaved the way they did. It can make them confront their own fears. Maybe they realize that fear influenced them more than love did. Maybe they were afraid of vulnerability. Maybe they were afraid of being misunderstood. Maybe they were afraid of getting hurt. Maybe they were simply not ready. Whatever the reason, readiness cannot be forced. People grow at different speeds. Some people understand their emotions quickly. Others need distance. Others need experience. Others need to lose access to something before they understand its value. That does not mean you should wait indefinitely for anyone. It simply means that people sometimes change when life teaches them something they could not learn through words alone. And maybe life has been teaching your soulmate, quietly, repeatedly, through memories, through comparison, through distance, through moments when something reminded them of you unexpectedly. Perhaps they thought they had moved on, then something happened. A familiar place, a familiar phrase, a familiar feeling, and suddenly, your memory returned, not as a painful memory, as a living one. They remembered the way you made them feel understood. They remembered something you said. They remembered a moment when you were there for them. They remembered something they never properly thanked you for. And perhaps they realized that they had been measuring the present against a memory they never fully released. That realization can be powerful. But here is what you must remember. You do not need to become obsessed with discovering exactly what happened last night. You do not need to investigate. You do not need to create a story in your head and treat it as certainty. A spiritual message can offer reflection, hope, and encouragement without pretending to know another person's private thoughts. The most important part is what this message awakens inside you. Maybe it reminds you that situations can change. Maybe it reminds you that endings are not always as simple as they appear. Maybe it reminds you that you are allowed to grow beyond the version of yourself that once needed an answer immediately. Maybe it reminds you that your future does not depend on one person's decision. That is where your power is. Your future is bigger than one relationship. Your life is bigger than one unanswered message. Your identity is bigger than whether someone chooses to return. And your worth was never waiting for another person to confirm it. Read that again slowly. Your worth was never waiting for another person to confirm it. You were valuable before they noticed. You were valuable while they were confused. You were valuable during the silence. You are valuable now. And if someone eventually recognizes that value, beautiful, but their recognition does not create it. It simply reveals what was already there. That is why this moment can be approached with peace. If your soulmate changed their mind, let their actions eventually demonstrate it. If they truly want to reconnect, healthy communication will matter. If they have something meaningful to say, they can say it respectfully. If they want another opportunity, they can show consistency. You do not have to carry the entire connection on your shoulders. You do not have to make every move. You do not have to decode silence. You do not have to turn yourself into someone else. Let reality speak. Let action speak. Let time reveal what words cannot. And while that happens, keep moving forward. There is another layer to this story. Sometimes when someone changes their mind about you, they do not immediately change their behavior. Why? Because the mind may still be negotiating with the heart. A person can miss someone and still be afraid to reach out. A person can care and still lack emotional maturity. A person can regret something and still not know how to repair it. A person can realize your importance and still need to learn how to communicate honestly. That is why you should never confuse someone's internal realization with a completed relationship. A realization is a beginning. Action is what gives it meaning. Consistency is what gives it trust. Respect is what gives it safety. And genuine communication is what gives two people a chance to understand one another. So if something does happen next, do not rush. You have nothing to prove. Listen, observe, think, ask questions when appropriate, protect your boundaries, and remember who you became during the period when you had no answers. That person deserves your loyalty too. Maybe you once imagined that your soulmate would arrive and suddenly everything would become perfect. But real emotional connections are more complicated than that. People have histories. People have fears. People make mistakes. People misunderstand one another. People grow. The most meaningful connections are not necessarily the ones without difficulties. They are the ones where people learn to communicate, respect boundaries, take responsibility, and grow together. So perhaps what happened last night is not a magical ending. Perhaps it is the beginning of a more honest understanding. Perhaps someone looked back and finally saw the situation without the distortion of fear. Perhaps they realized that they had been too quick to make a decision. Perhaps they recognized that the connection deserved more thought. Perhaps they finally admitted that you mattered more than they allowed themselves to say. And perhaps, most importantly, you are finally learning not to measure your future by what someone else decides. That is a transformation. You may have once thought, if they come back, then everything will be okay. Now you may be learning to say, if they come back, I will decide whether the connection is healthy for me. That is different. That is maturity. That is self-respect. That is growth. You are no longer standing at the door begging someone to enter. You are standing in your own life. If someone wants to walk toward you, they must walk honestly. If someone wants to speak, they must speak respectfully. If someone wants another chance, they must understand that trust is rebuilt through behavior. And if they do not come, you continue. Your life does not stop. Your joy does not stop. Your future does not stop. There is still beauty ahead. There are still friendships you have not experienced. There are still places you have not seen. There are still conversations that will change your perspective. There are still opportunities that may surprise you. There are still versions of yourself you have not met, so do not shrink your entire future around one person. Keep your heart open, but keep your life wide. Last night may have brought a change, but today brings a choice. Will you respond to uncertainty with fear, or will you respond with peace? Will you chase an answer, or will you allow reality to reveal itself? Will you replay every possibility, or will you return your attention to the life in front of you? The answer matters, because sometimes the greatest spiritual shift occurs when you stop asking, "What are they doing?" and begin asking, "What am I becoming?" That question can redirect your entire life. Maybe you are becoming more confident. Maybe you are becoming more patient. Maybe you are becoming more discerning. Maybe you are learning to recognize the difference between attention and genuine care. Maybe you are learning that chemistry is not the same as compatibility. Maybe you are learning that longing is not the same as love. Maybe you are learning that love without respect is not enough. These lessons may feel painful while you are learning them, but later, you may understand why they mattered. And perhaps your soulmate is learning lessons too. Maybe their lesson is about honesty, maybe it is about communication, maybe it is about recognizing what they truly want, maybe it is about not running away from meaningful emotion simply because they feel uncomfortable, maybe it is about understanding that another person's heart is not something to approach casually. Whatever their lesson is, it belongs to them. Your lesson belongs to you. Do not carry theirs. You cannot grow for someone else. You cannot heal for someone else. You cannot make someone ready. You can only become more honest with yourself. That is enough. And if the paths eventually cross again, you will meet that moment as a different person, not desperate, not begging, not trying to recreate the past. You will meet it with awareness. You will ask yourself whether the connection still fits the person you have become, because sometimes people return and discover that you are no longer willing to accept what you once accepted. That is not cruelty, that is growth. You can forgive someone without giving them unlimited access to your life. You can care about someone without depending on them. You can wish someone well without returning to an unhealthy situation. You can appreciate a connection without allowing it to control your emotions. That is freedom. And perhaps freedom is the hidden gift inside this entire message. Maybe the change last night is not only about your soulmate changing their mind. Maybe it is about you changing yours. Maybe you have changed your mind about what love should feel like. Maybe you no longer want confusion. Maybe you no longer want inconsistent attention. Maybe you no longer want to wonder where you stand. Maybe you want honesty. Maybe you want peace. Maybe you want someone who can communicate clearly. Maybe you want someone who respects your boundaries. Maybe you want a connection that does not require constant guessing. If so, honor that. Your standards are allowed to grow. Your understanding of love is allowed to mature. Your heart is allowed to want something healthier. And if someone from your past wants a place in your future, they must meet you with the same level of growth. This is why you should not rush toward the first sign of movement. A single message is not a transformation. A sudden appearance is not automatically a commitment. Words can be beautiful, actions tell the deeper story. Watch for consistency. Watch for respect. Watch for accountability. Watch for genuine effort. Watch for whether communication becomes clearer instead of more confusing. Those things matter more than dramatic promises. And if nothing happens immediately, do not assume that you were forgotten. More importantly, do not assume that you must wait. You can continue living. You can laugh. You can learn. You can create. You can spend time with people who care about you. You can focus on school, work, hobbies, family, creativity, and your own future. You can allow yourself to experience ordinary happiness. You do not have to keep your life paused for a possibility. Sometimes the most beautiful surprises arrive when you are no longer staring at the door. You are busy living, you are becoming, you are growing, and then life brings something unexpected. Maybe it is a conversation, maybe it is an apology, maybe it is clarity, maybe it is closure, maybe it is a new beginning. Maybe it is simply the realization that you are okay regardless of the outcome. All of those are forms of movement. That is why the word urgent should not make you anxious. Let it mean this. Pay attention to yourself. Pay attention to your growth. Pay attention to what you truly want. Pay attention to the difference between fantasy and reality. Pay attention to how people treat you. Pay attention to whether a connection brings peace or constant confusion. Pay attention to your own inner wisdom, because the greatest divine message may not be, your soulmate is coming. It may be, you are becoming ready for a healthier kind of love. That message changes everything. You do not need to know exactly what happened last night. You do not need to know what someone said behind closed doors. You do not need to know what thought crossed another person's mind at a particular moment. You only need to know that your life is still unfolding, and unfolding does not always look dramatic. Sometimes it looks like letting go. Sometimes it looks like sleeping peacefully after weeks of overthinking. Sometimes it looks like choosing not to send a message when you know you are acting from anxiety. Sometimes it looks like forgiving yourself. Sometimes it looks like accepting that you cannot control another person's decision. Sometimes it looks like waking up and realizing that your heart feels lighter. Those quiet moments matter. Maybe last night was one of those turning points.